Stan Lee might just be one of the most influential names in comic book history. No doubt the man was a superb businessman, a great personality, an outstanding ambassador for all things fiction, and a pioneer of his time. He is known as the creator of all your favorite Marvel characters, including the Amazing Spider-Man. But I hate to break it to you, but this is not the case. Stan Lee was never the creator of Spider-Man. And as a matter of fact, there was far more to Marvel in the 1960s than just Stan Lee, and that's what we'll be talking about today. The real-life origins of Spider-Man, and how far they extend beyond just one person. Now, I understand that this is gonna probably garner quite an emotional response in the comment section below. You just hate Stan Lee, you're trying to smear his name. This is a true injustice. Please understand that I love the crap out of Stan Lee, but there were other people involved in the creation of Spider-Man and other Marvel Comics characters that just deserve far more recognition than they got. Once again, this video is sponsored by NordVPN, and you can get 4 months free with a 3-year subscription by using my discount code. Everything you need is in the description below, so check it out. Alright, onwards. It seems that Spider-Man has spent his entire life just watching his parents fight, be it the creators of Spider-Man in the world of the comic books, or who hold the film rights to the Spider-Man character, and, well, we've talked enough about that. There's always kind of been a custody battle going on with Spider-Man. Today it's between Sony Pictures and Marvel Studios, but back then it was between 3 guys: Stan Lee, Steve Ditko, and Jack Kirby. The story commonly goes that Stan Lee had the idea for a teenage superhero called the Spider-Man, and he wanted him to be really unique. He took the idea to Jack Kirby, but felt it was too traditional, so he brought it over to Steve Ditko for a more grounded style. And the rest is kinda history. But we're gonna look into more of the nitty-gritty details. So according to Stan Lee himself, he was inspired when he saw a fly walking up a wall and thinking, wow, what if a person was able to just climb a wall like that? We've got flying heroes already, but what about a Spider-Man? So Stan Lee and Jack Kirby sat down to work on a few concepts. But allegedly, Jack Kirby was already working on the idea of a spider character prior to working with Marvel. I'm not sure how far back that dates, but it was supposed to be pretty similar to the concepts he came up with for Stan Lee. The Silver Spider, he's able to climb walls, and he has a gun that can shoot webs at people, and he lives with an elderly couple. This was the very early concept for Spider-Man, your usual righteous, very traditional superhero, quite similar to Captain America, who was also created by Jack Kirby. But Stan Lee had a revelation. He wanted to do something that was at that time unheard of, a teenage superhero. He wasn't satisfied with the concepts that Jack Kirby had come up with, and he wanted someone more grounded and raw to take on this project. Steve Ditko was a perfect fit for this, as his art style was very realistic. He knew how to tell stories in a way that broke away from the dynamic action poses and muscle-bound fantasies of your traditional superhero comic book, which would be perfect for a more grounded comic book story about a teenage superhero. So Steve Ditko took the concept of the Silver Spider and reworked it into Spider-Man. Ditko came up with the idea of Peter shooting webs out of his web shooters as opposed to a gun. He designed the iconic Spider-Man costume, which still looks amazing today, and he really fleshed out the character of Spider-Man. According to Steve Ditko, the situation went something like this. Stan Lee gave Steve Ditko rough outlines of what he needed to do, and it was Steve Ditko that fleshed these things out and filled in the blanks. So it could be guessed that maybe Steve Ditko was the one that came up with Peter Parker himself, as the process went like this. Stan Lee gave Ditko a premise, a brief, an idea. Steve Ditko wrote the story, and then Stan Lee filled in the dialogue bubbles. This would effectively make Stan Lee the producer and screenplay writer if we were speaking in film terms, but it would make Steve Ditko the writer. Steve Ditko also created much of Spider-Man's rogues gallery, including such favorites as the Green Goblin, Doc Ock, and Mysterio, to name a few, as well as coming up with Peter Parker's overall personality being more of a shy wallflower who gets a little little bit bitter at times. As a matter of fact, Peter Parker was actually based on Steve Ditko himself, and Peter Parker's appearance in the Steve Ditko Spider-Man comics was based on a young Steve Ditko. Now, in 1966, Steve Ditko left Marvel Comics, and John Romita Sr. was assigned to take control of Spider-Man. And there's definitely a stark contrast not only between the artwork of Steve Ditko and John Romita Sr., but also the writing. Steve Ditko Spider-Man comics play out almost like an episode of The Twilight Zone that focuses on a young teenage superhero. They're everyman tales with a very sort of psychedelic twist. John Romita Sr. Spider-Man comics play out a bit more like an Archie comic with a superhero twist, focusing more on the more sort of soap opera side of the Peter Parker character and evolving him from the wallflower to more of a dandy, which reflects more of what Stan Lee used to do before working with Marvel superheroes. He used to do soap comics. I think while Stan Lee certainly played a big role in the creation of Spider-Man in enlisting Steve Ditko to take on this concept and this character and completely refine it in its entirety, it is evident that at the very, very, very least, Steve Ditko is the co-creator of the Spider-Man that we know and love today, and that he is arguably the most influential figure in the creation of Spider-Man. While Steve Ditko was not interested in any kind of fame when it came to his work, and just a man that kind of wanted to separate himself from his work, he did not want other people claiming credit for it. While he wanted to be able to separate himself from his work, he still acknowledged that his work was his work. So to try and sort of settle the score and set the record straight, Stan Lee wrote an open letter to Steve Ditko, stating that Stan Lee considers Steve Ditko to be the co-creator of Spider-Man. However, Ditko didn't take particularly kindly to the wording of this phrase. I consider you to be the co-creator of Spider-Man. As far as Ditko was concerned, there was no I consider you to be the co-creator of Spider-Man. He was the co-creator of Spider-Man. It was an objective fact that Steve Ditko was the co-creator of Spider-Man. Now, if I'm being completely honest here, I think Stan Lee probably had the best intentions, but I can see why the wording would have been taken that way. However, Steve Ditko also had ample opportunity to step up himself and set the record straight publicly, but he chose not to because of his avoidance of fame. It ends up being paradoxical though, when you want the recognition you deserve for the most famous character of all time, or at least one of them, but you don't want to be famous, you know? It's totally paradoxical. But I understand what he's saying here, you know, you want to separate yourself from your work, but you still want people to acknowledge that your work is your work. But now, we're gonna throw another spanner at this thing. Look out, webhead, there's another spanner coming your way, think fast. Jack Kirby, at one stage, went so far as to claim that he was the rightful creator of Spider-Man, that he created Spider-Man and he created Spider-Man's costume. Yet it's a known fact that the Spider-Man that we know and love was designed by Steve Ditko. Shish, what a yo-yo. Well guys, watch out, because there is a massive spanner coming your way. Spider-Man swung into our world in 1962, in his classic webbed costume. However, in 1954, novelty costume company Ben Cooper were selling this Halloween costume of a Spider-Man. Well, I don't see any resemblance. Oh, now I see the resemblance. So wait, hold on a minute though. Who designed the Spider-Man costume for Ben Cooper? None other than Ben Cooper's lead designer, Jack Kirby. Did Steve Ditko really draw inspiration from a Ben Cooper catalog? Scratch that, did he plagiarize it? Does it transpire that one of the most influential yet underrated people in comic history plagiarized Spider-Man's costume from a novelty Halloween catalog? No, you're being hysterical. The one and only thing that the Ben Cooper Spider-Man costume has in common with Spider-Man is that it's got some webs on it. And you know, when you think spiders, you tend to think they've got 8 legs and they spin webs. Webs are kind of one of the things that we immediately associate with a spider. So if you were to make a Spider-Man and were to give him a spider-themed costume, the odds are webs would come into play somewhere down the line. Well, you'd certainly think anyway. The similarities really do end at the webs though. It's a completely different structure, it's a completely different design, completely different color scheme, as this costume was yellow and blue, whereas Spider-Man in Steve Ditko's run was red and black. Yeah, also, common misconception. Spider-Man was red and black in the early Ditko run. It was changed to red and blue later on. Again, by Steve Ditko, it wasn't John Romita Sr. that established that. Originally, the blue highlights on his costume were supposed to just represent light reflecting from it. Because if you did it in all black, it wouldn't really be very visible. So, the more you know. So, I think to say that Steve Ditko's design was plagiarized from Jack Kirby's Spider-Man Halloween costume for Ben Cooper is a reach. And as well as that, like, superhero costumes have always been based on existing outfits. Like, Superman and Batman, for example, are based off of luchador wrestler outfits. If any kind of inspiration was drawn from it, then to be fair, it wouldn't be that out of the ordinary. Jack Kirby has had one lasting influence on Spider-Man, though, post his early work with the Silver Spider. While Amazing Fantasy 15, the debut appearance of Spider-Man, was illustrated entirely by Steve Ditko, the cover was actually illustrated by Jack Kirby. A cover was illustrated by Steve Ditko for this issue, however Stan Lee wasn't satisfied by it, so he had Jack Kirby do an adaptation of it. And I cannot even begin to fathom why, to be completely honest. I thought Steve Ditko's version was far more kinetic, far more acrobatic looking, and less clumsy. What also makes this a little bit awkward is that after Steve Ditko's death, a lot of people were sharing that Amazing Fantasy 15 cover in their tributes to Steve Ditko, even though that was drawn by Jack Kirby after Steve Ditko's version was rejected. It really is just, it's a bit awkward, the whole thing. Like, Steve Ditko's role in Spider-Man and Jack Kirby's role in Spider-Man are so oddly cloudy in the grand scheme of things. I do think Jack Kirby has some grounds to kind of see himself as kind of a creator of the character, though, because he did a very early version of it, and while it has barely anything in common with Steve Ditko's version, without Kirby's original vision, we might not have had the Spider-Man that we have today under Steve Ditko. So basically, had Stan Lee not gone to Steve Ditko, Spider-Man as we know him would never have happened. Jack Kirby created the very early concepts for Spider-Man, which will have maybe had some inspiration with Steve Ditko. Without Steve Ditko, Spider-Man as we know him would not have happened. Therefore, all three of these people were instrumental to the creation of Spider-Man. So in conclusion, I would say that Spider-Man was created by Steve Ditko, Jack Kirby, and Stan Lee. But the one who made the biggest contribution to Spider-Man is by far Steve Ditko. But the truth is, this spans across the entire Marvel Universe, to be honest. Steve Ditko was also instrumental in the creation of Doctor Strange. Jack Kirby created Captain America, and he didn't create him for Marvel Comics. Stan Lee had no involvement with Captain America's early days. It was also Steve Ditko that formed the lasting image of Iron Man in his red and gold armor. Ditko played an extremely formative role there too. Par the course, comic injustices were not uncommon at this time. Flip over to DC Comics, Bob Kane was for decades known as the creator of Batman. He was a sleazy, wealthy businessman. And then there's Bill Finger, who died penniless. But without Bill Finger, the Batman would be a guy wearing a red jumpsuit that shoots people and kills them, which is why today it's credited as Bob Kane and Bill Finger who created Batman. But same goes for with Ditko and Stan Lee. Bob Kane definitely had the larger contribution, as did Steve Ditko to Spider-Man. I mean, one point I raised was that Steve Ditko created much of Spider-Man's rogues gallery, and I think the villains make the hero in a way. Therefore, you could make the argument that because Jerry Conway created the Joker, he's also in a way a creator of the Batman. But that's a discussion with a lot of crossroads, and that I think is all going to come under your definition of how these characters are created and what makes them who they are. The truth is, guys, I think Stan Lee deserves all the praise in the world. I just believe that Steve Ditko, Jack Kirby, and many, many others deserve the same level of aspiration. Because Stan Lee is not the only face of Marvel, and nor should he be. Something that I guess could render the whole argument null and void is that in some ways, the way different artists and writers interpret these characters can be so different to one another that in a way they all created Spider-Man, they all created Batman, they all created Iron Man. For Spider-Man, Steve Ditko, John Romita Sr. and Jr., Mark Bagley, Brian Michael Bendis, Todd McFarlane, they all created their own Spider-Man in a way. So I think what defines the creator of Spider-Man is definitely more complex than just saying this character was created by Stan Lee, or even just saying this character was created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. This character was created. Sorry, I got a case of the cotton mouth here, I think. Well, what do you true believers think? Comment below and discuss, and as always, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, don't forget to hit subscribe, hit the like button, and in the description below is the link to my Patreon. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and have an amazing, an ultimate day. Hope you ain't lactose intolerant, because that was cheesy. That's a cute outfit. Did your husband give it to you? Because you could get a way better costume from Zentai Zone. Check out their range of custom-made, tailored superhero costumes. Ridiculously good quality, value, and customization. Link is in the description below, as well as my coupon code CHANNELPUP, where you can get a discount off of your purchase. And while you're at it, why not get your suit designed by my talented buddy Dan from New Blood Dan's workshop? You can contact him via the link in the description below. Seriously, guys, you do not want to miss out on your chance to be your favorite superhero and feel authentic and professional. And you don't want to miss out on that Channel Pup discount.
Can you feel the sunshine? Does it bright?